what's going really well on your promotions that you're putting together, and what are you struggling with the most, connecting your learnings from Gen AI into how you're iterating on it.
Identify common, effective storytelling techniques. How can I craft this story? What are different ways? And I think you could use them right now to start figuring out your narrative and the plot of your value story. Hello there. Welcome. This is My Next Big Move with Jonathan Essery and Tom Warson. Hit it. All right. Hey, Tom.
Right.
All right. I got to bring some energy in because, man, I am...
I mean, you can if you want.
Catching up.
Be where you're at today. No.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. You asked what I was doing this week.
Yeah.
I feel
you
like
said you were making it, and I wanted to know more about what that meant for you.
Right. Busy in the most best way possible. That's terrible English.
Yeah.
Between family life and my engagement work, and we got like it's our promotion cycle right now, which is always a laborious process. So I'm learning a lot in communicating effectively, which is personally just nice. It's nice to learn more about that stuff. So, but it is laborious.
Is it just to clarify, are you going for a promotion, or are you helping your people go for it?
Both.
Yeah.
Getting it. How about yourself?
From both sides, yeah.
Yeah. You going for one or no?
No, I don't know. I have mixed feelings on our promotion process.
As many do. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm kind of waiting to see what happens with our transition to IBM.
See how IBM does it.
Yeah. I've been even given some feedback that it might not be worth it.
Oh, really?
Sort of frustrating.
That's weird. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, or at least it was in the last cycle.
And
I mean, talk about a little bit of like, imposter syndrome or whatever you want to call it, of since moving into this more internal role at the company, I feel like I don't have as many like bullet points of look at my accomplishments and achievements from a delivery perspective, right?
Yeah, well, you wouldn't. Like, your value would be presented in a different place. I feel like, yeah.
And I know that we've talked about this before, and in previous episodes, you even gave a really great, kind of reframing of the that type of work and everything like that. So, but yeah, and I mean, there's a part of that too of just I do wish I was at a different level and had a different level of responsibilities.
Where it would be clearer. Yeah, so that's a very common. I haven't worked at a lot of places, but the places I've worked at, I think, are relatively typical when it comes to hiring practices or promotion practices. It's not very clear how does it distinguish your value as an employee outside of your hourly responsibilities, let's say. And then there's always the question of like more, I'm just going to say generally, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny, like I got really frustrated with that a few years ago. Well, in architecture, like my personal opinion, wages don't match the skill set, or certainly not the effort in the contribution. And I always got frustrated with that, like really early, like why not? And then like you have the older people going like, well, you haven't put in your dues, you got to put in, you got to put in the hours and put in the years. And I was like, okay, maybe, but I also just got skilled in got a master's degree in something that you're telling me is now worthless because you only
care about
value the number of years someone has actually worked in an office, which was also very confusing to me. And so it I've been sharpening my value tool and understanding, and I'm trying to understand this exchange of value and realizing that is a core language economically for any business. And we sort of shape it up into business objectives or business outcomes, but sometimes we talk so distinctly of the business and the people that it's not so obvious how the people tie and deliver the value of the business when that's what they're doing on their day-to-day practice. And so, I've been on a hunt of clarifying that for myself, of like, and that's been some of the advice I've gotten too, is at a certain level, you kind of have to connect the dots between what you're contributing to and how that is directly tied to business value, let's say, in some way, shape, or form. And it's not easy. That's one of the things I like about our process, is it makes you think about those things a little bit. Even though it's kind of difficult to do.
Yeah. I think it feels like there's a disconnect between the work that people do, the value that they're delivering, and the value of like what the business is actually looking for, or what the business actually does. People don't know how they're contributing to the greater business value because they don't understand the business model, or it's never been explained to them. I don't understand why I have to do this task or do this process. It's so inane. It's so boring, blah, blah, blah. Why do I have to submit an expense report like this? Like, oh, come on, well, because it's contributing in this way, both positively and from a cost perspective. It's sort of like you can't see the bigger picture, so it makes it harder to describe the narrative from, what am I trying to say? From my personal angle, it's like, well, I know what I'm doing. I know the value that I'm delivering. But the people who are evaluating me as a potential promotion case or whatever have a completely different view of the business, and they're looking for X number of things, right? And I think this is why we create things like OKRs and goal setting and stuff like that. It's like show that what you're doing plays into what the bigger picture needs. And the gap that I think that happens is not everyone understands what the bigger needs are. They just, you told me I needed to, improve these things by 10%, and I did it at 12%. Like, great, give me a promotion.
Yeah.
So that's what maybe I'm just at a point today where I'm just a little bit disillusioned by the whole thing. I've had a number of like previous positions and like at different companies where I've been given a responsibility, I've been put in charge of something, and it just seems to go nowhere. I'm like, I know that I did a really good job at this. I'm proud of my accomplishment. And because the company or because an executive or whoever decided to take things in a different direction, I was exited from the company or, something.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain amount of just like, well, what am I worth to you people then? Like, I busted my butt and you know?
Yeah.
And so translating that to our current like promotion process and kind of how there's this whole like, it feels very narrative driven everything of like, well, okay, tell us your story. Tell us the story of the value that you're adding.
Yeah.
To what you said, learning communication.
Yeah.
But it just, at some point, it just feels like a game, it just feels, I'm wordsmithing and iterating through all these things, and I have to come up with some strategic way of presenting myself. And all I really want to do is just say, I deserve to be a manager. I know I'm delivering it for you.
Sure.
I'm I've been a working professional for over 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked in multiple industries. I know how to communicate well with people. Why do I have to write a research paper that tends to give me a promotion?
Yeah. I think that's a common frustration.
So that HR can cover their butt and say like, well, we promoted them into this new position based on these things, and if they're not working out, we at least have a paper trail to justify our decision.
That's a pretty pessimistic way of looking at it, but I'm sure I think there are places run like that, though, for sure.
Yeah, or the positive side of it is avoiding a meritocracy, right? Or trying to create more of a meritocracy instead of just saying like, well, why did that person get promoted and not me?
Yeah,
it's like, well, okay, yeah, we do need to have some kind of a rubric that
a rubric's a good word for it.
Yeah, that sort of says like, this is what we expected of people in order to reach the next level.
Yeah, what it means to be at that level.
Ways that they ticked those boxes and you didn't. So,
and those are often. I keep saying often. I'm going to stop saying often. I've noticed.
You often say often. No.
Frequently. I've noticed when the idea of cohort criteria, which is what we use, aligns with when you start to get a fuller picture of the business of consulting, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It aligns with the common skills needed to interact with clients, to either deliver or obtain new work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you are gifted in being charismatic, if you're gifted with reading people and knowing how to connect with them, how to impress upon them ideas or a version of something that they will value, right? Then you're a good salesperson. Oftentimes you're going to be a good consultant, sort of naturally. And so I feel like I'm of two opinions. Like, one, I'm starting to understand why there is a bar and why we're able to put certain criteria to that bar. Now, is it tied to years of experience? Maybe. Is it tied to number of, having a high number of engagements or interactions with clients? Maybe.
Yeah.
It could equally be the lessons that you learned on a really hard, messy project that just happened to go through all of, a whole plethora of learnings that you came out of it just sharp as diamonds, to then apply that going forward, and you knocked it out of the park on the next one, and now all of a sudden in a compressed time frame you demonstrated that value. But to your point on doing that from core business, certainly at a consultancy, it's not the same apples to apples. You have to make an oranges comparison, but still tied to how you're facilitating that work, right? And that can be tough. It's really hard. It often feels like a moving target, but I think a lot of that is because the people that are leading the company have an idea of their experience from when things have really worked and from the counsel of others to then, as a community determine, we've seen this work and we've across 50 to 500 different examples. And these top 10 are what we would like to see going forward. And it's everyone's interpretation of that top 10 or description of it is going to be in their own words, which is why it's so difficult to get ABC done and then move on to promotion, right? It's just not automatic.
Yeah.
And I will say my second part and feeling of this whole process being here 3 years now, frankly, which was surprising, it snuck up on me, is I came from an industry where it felt far more subjective.
Yeah.
There weren't really laid out clear criteria to meet. There was at best a short list of questions that you would review with your manager. And you would answer them, they would answer them, and then they would tell you where, you'd often be thinking you were doing a better job than what they were seeing. And so you have that conversation of the gap, and then you work on those things. And then the next year you kind of do the same thing. And so you have to find your way through that. And for me, it was like the aha moment of really looking at what's that exchange of value, and then how do I start to speak to that value? How do I start to interpret that? And that's what allowed me to do the pivot from architecture into technology. It was I have like 10 things that people specialize and build an entire career out of. And I'm not able to like jump right into editing cinematic film, but give me a week and I'd be able to do that, because that's the skill sets that you get trained on as an architect, is all the things that go into what that person would specialize in, just not at that level, right? And so when I started seeing that, it was like, okay, now how do I start to paint that picture differently? How do I deconstruct my skill set? And I like this idea, and I want to carry forward as we meander a little longer on these narratives that you're talking about in your career and what you've seen. Excuse me. And something that I've shared recently, I've been talking about this value exchange. It's one of the things that, I have come to start to crystallize. And a recent article that I shared with you I'm calling How to Master the System of Success. It sounds so, I've made it. I know how to do things now, but
it's going to be the title of your book.
We'll see. It's a start, Tom. It's a start. That might be my next big move, because I'm working on a lot of things. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes.
Start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just do that. But that idea of value exchange, I think, is pertinent to everything. It's one of the key parts of the system, and if you can figure that one out, it unlocks a few other things you want to dive into. But I'm curious about, I know we've been talking about promotion and some of the difficulties and challenges of crafting that narrative of yourself and how it contributes to the company's value, and thinking that you've gotten to a place where I think I'm ready for the next step, and not knowing exactly the right bridge across that chasm. I'm curious what you think of that exchange of value and how you might interpret that. I think there's also another lesson I wanted to share with anyone else that's listening that was a big aha moment for me in my journey so far.
Yeah.
And that is,
please.
I sort of framed it up in that you have to know your worth and who it's most valuable to. Right. Mm-hmm. And that also combines with whatever you are doing has to be visible to somebody else, or it's not going to translate. I had this concern recently. I'm, the only dialexan on my particular engagement. We value a lot on like feedback to support, right, the evidence that we present for our promotion cases and how we go through that cycle, which I think is very valuable, even though it is very difficult. And so, you know, I just want to lay out those 2 points of like, it all comes down to how you interpret, craft, and then communicate that. And then other people will help sharpen that along the way of saying, I'm not seeing this, I'm not seeing that. The best managers and feedback I've gotten is like, where is that? Do you have it? I'm just, like, does it fit in there? And if not, let's find ways to get you that. How can we get you that? Right.
Well, and it's interesting too, because so I remember listening to some podcast or whatever that was talking about products, right? And a common mistake when developing specifically a software product is, you have this backlog of features, things that you want to put into the product. You want to put it into the next release. And there's all these business arguments for like, well, I need this feature, or we need to put in this other feature or whatever. And what ends up happening is, you have limited amount of capacity with your engineers, your ability to implement different things. So you have to start making trade-offs. But the nugget that I remember this podcast sharing was, you shouldn't be targeting features. You should be targeting the value, the people. And typically what that means is you're going to eliminate certain customers from your release in order to eliminate the right features. Because if you're delivering a feature that's very valuable, but it's not able to be fully implemented, but it's going to reach, a broad spectrum of your customers, no one's going to use it. But if you take that feature with another feature and another feature within one chain and you make it super valuable to that chain of people, and basically it means like, yes, you're going to have to build a very hard, complicated thing. Like, there's all this low-hanging fruit that can deliver value to all these other people. And yes, there's this really hard thing, but you need to do this really hard thing for this one group of people to really get the value from your product.
And that's really what niching is. I hear this term and it's always around like topic oriented things, but it's really the process, I feel like, that you just laid out.
Yeah. Call it part of the long tail business model, right? Where you're serving a very specific, market. But you're doing both the easy and the hard things to serve that market top, like their entire value chain, where they're like, yes, that is going to help me. Instead of them saying, you've gotten me part of the way there, but that's not going to fully help me today until you implement all these other things. And you're like, oh man, those things are really hard. They're in our backlog, but we'll get to them when we get to them. You're going to lose those customers because your product doesn't deliver the full amount of value. And so it almost looks exclusive, like creating exclusivity by saying, we're going to ignore these other people. We're going to ignore these other customers, because if we want to deliver value, we have to do something. Anyway, I'm tying this to thinking about yourself almost as a product and saying, okay, I need to deliver value to people, to companies, whatever. What am I eliminating? What am I going to exclude as far as the value that I want to add in order to, and then what are the easy and hard things that I need to do in order to say, you are getting value from me?
Yeah.
I struggle a little bit sometimes because I'm so interested in so many things.
We share that.
I am both fragile and I do think a lot of myself. I know that I'm intelligent. I know that I'm smart and I can learn things quickly and I can piece together a lot of complicated things and make them simple. I, struggle to believe that other people see that value.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I'm just like, okay, well, then who are the right people to show that value to?
Yeah.
And it's probably not middle managers. It's probably, like not the people in my company or other companies who are going to be like, all right, I'm going to consider you for a promotion, because they might not be interested in the thing where I can say, here's how I deliver value, because I know myself. So who do I eliminate? And then who do I focus on? And then what do I need to do in order to show those people who I'm focusing on the maximum value that they need? And then how do I improve?
That's an interesting lesson.
So I'm curious for you, like, as part of that question of talking about narratives, you are kind of creating a narrative about your value as you're going through this promotion case. And I'm curious, you can talk about it at a broad scale of just like in general in your life. And you can also use maybe the specific example of you writing this promotion case of like, who am I excluding from trying to describe my value to? And who do I need to focus on? Who do I want to focus on in saying like, these are the people, this is the market, this is the band that I want to say, you need value and I can give it to you. And then how do you construct your narrative around that?
That's a good question.
It's a really broad question.
Yeah, but it hinges on the realization, the revelation that I can't be all things to all people, or I am nothing to no one. And it hinges on that moment in your, development in your life that I've been through, because we share that thing in common where we have a broad interest, and it's a deep interest immediately. It's like an instant connection of like, I just want to know, how does that work? And I want to, I'm like, I'm like a conceptual tinkerer. Like, I just want to know all the pieces in there. And even though I'm never going to do that thing, whatever it might be. But I might. So, who knows? I might find something.
We might build that feature one day. Let's keep it in the
backlog. Yeah.
It's a trap.
Yeah. Oh man, we could take that in so many tangents.
I know. Yeah.
To come back to this, I had to do this when I considered leaving architecture as an industry, let's say. And it was just the, being a generalist, I think, is powerful, certainly in consulting, but it's not easy to demonstrate that value because it's not direct. A specialist, I know exactly who to hire when my plumbing breaks, when, my drywall needs to be fixed, or I need to, build a house in general, and I need someone to coordinate all of the other people to do that. But that the general contractor in that example is a generalist. His specialty is in coordinating all the right people to ensure the delivery of what they can do gets you the house at the end of the day that you want.
Yeah.
And the architect is the designer and the visionary that then gives those plans to the contractor that then disseminates and delivers on the desired outcome. And so you need to find a way as a generalist, if you are a generalist like Tom and I, to cut out certain industries, cut out certain interests. And you should do that according to what your core strengths are. You should build on your core strengths. You should find out what those things are. And this was a hard thing for me because it was I'm good at everything. To speak blunt, this is how I think about myself. I literally rarely struggle with learning anything new except for languages. I suck at languages. My wife is trying. She's like, "You speak, you speaking Spanish yet?" Everybody I run into is, poquito. every time, poquito. But it's growing. I'm getting better. But that doesn't fly when it comes to trying to get a raise, for example. It's like, well, I'm good at everything. You should just pay me more. Then there are questions to what are you able to actually contribute in that new role. And so as a generalist, it's hard you have to tell a narrative in order to describe the value of coordinating a team, for example, or communicating effectively a very complex thing that your client didn't really have an understanding of, but you had typically a framework or a systematic way or method that broke those things down, like a journey map, for example, that laid it out in front of them, that all of a sudden they had an aha moment. So how do you say that you did that? Well, you can facilitate that meeting. You could be the one that proposed that, right? These are all delivery examples. In core business, it might be an efficiency or that you can point to that delivered greater clarity of a certain percentage of work. I don't really know everything about your particular role, but I'm just thinking, those internal mechanisms that make the business run more smoothly are pretty valuable. But you have to make that, you have to tell that story, or otherwise it's going to be like, oh yeah, that's just what you're supposed to do. Right. Just like you deliver a product. Well, that's just what you're supposed to do. It worked.
And, it's interesting because my role is in a unique place right now, doing staffing for our company. I can show that I'm delivering value by freeing up time for my boss. Like I'm taking on his responsibilities so that he can attend more higher level things and be focused on that rather than worrying about the, stuff that I have.
Taking things off his plate. I think it's good.
Yeah. A lot of the things that I would consider like worthy of showing I've done a great job are things like making improvements and improving efficiencies, coordinating various things, which I'm not able to do because my position or the type of work that I'm doing will probably be overwritten or phased out. And so I'm like, I could show my value by improving the system of staffing, but I can't do that right now because our system of staffing is going to go to the wind to go to IBM's system of staffing. So if I want to show improvements, I need to be improving IBM's way of staffing, which I'm not a part of.
But so I think there's a fallacy in that, though.
So that's, and maybe that's my challenge is narratives are powerful. And I think I've locked myself into a certain narrative of, well, there's nothing that I can do.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
There's no improvements to be
Fallacy
made because no one's going to want to make the improvements to something that's not going to exist in a few
Fallacy
months.
number 2.
Perfectly. I mean, it's partially valid. It's a little bit of a fallacy. You're right too. So how do I reframe that narrative? And I think it starts with who's your audience, who's your market. One of those audiences being myself. What's the narrative I want to tell myself? And what does that narrative look like? What does the narrative that I tell other people look like? And this is what's potentially very interesting about Gen AI as a tool. I think we've talked about this a little bit. I'm trying to make an effort of writing out the narrative of my career or a narrative of my career, right? And trying to be as verbose as I can. Understanding that using a Gen AI tool, the more you give it, the more source data it has, the better it can create its predictions. And then using a Gen AI tool like that to say, like, okay, reframe this description of my career for someone who needs to understand their value to themselves. Or reframe this as somebody who is looking for a senior project manager type job, or a senior executive who you're trying to convince of a promotion. You know, like this, and it's not going to give me everything that I need. I understand that. But it's going to give me a starting point of seeing like, okay, cool. How can I reframe the reality of what I've done and what I've experienced in a focused way that I can build from there? And you've done a lot of the Skunkworks Gen AI stuff with Dialexa. So I'm curious what your perspective is on that sort of application, writing out this sort of story, and then like, okay, now tell me that story in a different way, or create a resume that can be readable by a computer based on this description of my career experience. You know, have you seen any proofs of concept, or, you know, what are your thoughts on?
That's an interesting idea, because I do feel like that's a way that we address ourselves, right? One of the more useful applications for, you know, these generative tools that are leveraging LLMs is they are, in essence, our own ghosts. Like, we are the ghosts in the machine, right? They are our memories. They are our written examples, even if they're wrong. That's us. Like, we're fallible. Like, we put lies out there in the world, and then we ask everybody else to try and decipher them or not, right? And so I think this sort of helping yourself understand yourself is a great use case, but you have to give the tool sort of, and then not fully trust it when it comes back, right? It's an idea machine, let's call it, in that particular case. So you're generating ideas, and then you, as the receiver of that idea, is either going to agree with it, either have an aha, I hadn't quite thought about it that way. It's going to be like some nuanced difference that may or may not be valuable to you. And a lot of that, there are some common things, I think, to keep in mind to leverage AI tools like that. One is it's a generalizer of information. So the more specific and explicit you can be, the more specific and explicit it can be, even though it won't always hit that mark. Sometimes it'll come out that way and it'll feel like it, but you got to be smart enough to be like, okay, this sounds good, but is it hitting all of the pieces? Oh, wait, this is general language. That's general language. How can I further refine what it is more clearly that I'm talking about?
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying about, you know, using these Gen AI tools as idea creators. They're a launching point. You know, the hardest part about launching a rocket is firing the engines for the first time and getting it started.
Yeah, and flowing the right way. Yeah.
Yeah, because you have to go from going from 0 to 1 is way harder than going from 80 to 100.
Yeah.
So these tools are the catalysts that make going from 0 to 1 that much easier. That being said, I think you're totally right, is that they're not going to get you to 100. So it's still up to you to do the refinement, to still discern, okay, what if this is good? What if this is not good? What if this is true? What if this is not true? What if this works? What doesn't work? And I would actually be very curious if there's any like journal or research papers out there on the number of human refinements that need to happen before the Gen AI tool actually gives something that the prompt is looking for. Like, if you consider the original prompt, write me a paragraph about this. Okay, that's close. Write it in this other way. Okay, replace some of these words with that word. How many refinements does it take before the Gen AI tool has finally said, like, okay, cool, we've whittled your prompt down to something very, very specific that is giving you exactly what you're looking for.
How many licks does it take? to get to the center.
I almost said
that. All of my fellow millennials out there.
How many Gen X? So,
well, I don't know, but I can tell you that you can reduce the number of interactions you need by clarifying your prompt right out of the gate. So there's a method for structuring kind of that interaction that I've adopted, and I learned it from Rich Teal from Product Forge.
Okay.
He did a presentation recently at I think Scrum Alliance, and that might be wrong, but it's beautiful. It's 4 things. You set the context. So like generally, like it's like talking with a colleague that you're walking down the hall, or you meet them to kind of solve this problem. You know, how would you interact with them? So you want to set the context of what we're talking about. You want to give them kind of the specific things that they need to know to give you any kind of meaningful feedback, like something that you're struggling with, so they know how to interact with you. You then identify your desired outcome. Like, what is the outcome you're looking to have from this conversation? And then lastly, you can identify the format you want it in. Do you want it in a bulleted list? Do you want it in a narrative form? Do you want it in a table, for example? Those 4 sections are just communication tools. It's a way of structuring a concise instruction for how someone might be able to help you. And that's how you can do that. That's how you limit the number of interactions to start getting more quality out of your interactions with generative tools. It's what I use with Dialectic's AI Studio all the time, or any other tool that I end up using, because I want to get to the valuable pieces of information. And to some of your points earlier, that's one. That's a good start. The second is you guide the conversation. If you don't know, ask it, and it'll give you a list of how it would solve that problem. And then you tell it to go solve all of those problems. How would you solve it? What are the answer to all of those? How can I find those? And it gives you, you don't even have to like think about the process at that point. You can ask it for the process. And then if you disagree with it, I mean, of course you can abandon it, because this is an idea generator.
Yeah.
Right. And so the way I think about generative AI in a lot of ways is it's the new legal pad that you're sketching out ideas, right? You're not printing that out and giving it to a bunch of other people, right? It's not going to
create a final product.
Like, Seinfeld doesn't get up there and just read from his notebook that he just wrote, right? He practices, and then he uses it to craft his delivery, and then he goes and delivers, right? That's on him.
It's really like Mike Birbiglia's Working It Out podcast, because he to other comedians and they work through like the structure of a joke, and
how does it land? How does it hit? What's a better setup?
Comedy routines are a great example of this, because it's like nobody walks on stage and has a perfect routine.
Anyway. These conversational tools are exactly the same in that way. In that particular way, you're crafting a conversation, you're learning little nuances. If you want it in a different format, you tell it to put it in a different format. And there's going to be some post-edit things afterwards. This is part of like my 1, 2, 3 method that I've been sharing with others. And that's how you get the most out of these tools. It's not going to give you a perfect thing right out of the gate. And so in your example, as we're getting a layer deeper into like your career narrative of how to understand what you've done and how to craft that, or how to share that with somebody else, you want to give it all of the context that it needs. Maybe that's your resume. Maybe it's like a list of projects that you were involved with. Maybe it's a number of speaking events you've been at. You can start to ask it to craft how you would tell someone else the most valuable elements given their position and role, like executive leadership in communication. What are they going to care about? You can even ask that. What does executive leadership in a communications industry care about most? How can I then relate to that? Now you can start, like, you have a meaningful wall to start throwing spaghetti at. Right.
Has learning these prompts, like prompt engineering and stuff like that, has it helped you with your communication on, say, your promotion case? A lot of those, like the things that you're talking about, like it has to have this kind of context, I'm going to output it in this kind of format. How has that informed how, using your promotion case as an example? Because I'm also curious, like what's going really well on your promotion
putting that thing together
that you're putting together, and what are you struggling with the most, connecting your learnings from Gen AI into how you're iterating on it.
Yeah, I will share that the most requested item, and maybe it's just the way that we phrase it here, but I think it's spot on what people are asking. But the most requested item is a clear impact statement. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, "What the heck do you mean?" Like I rolled into this company making impact, baby. Like you can't see it, and it's really easy to have that initial reaction, but then I kept hearing it over and over. So I was like, what the heck is a good impact statement? So it's been crafting that. There's been a few others, and you try to talk, and everybody kind of has their way of doing it. And there are some methods, maybe we'll put it in the show notes here, or point to some places if that's valuable to people. But without getting into the details there, it's helped me, one, identify what an impact statement is. Identify common, effective storytelling techniques. How can I craft this story? What are different ways? I'm literally staring at, that's the wrong word. I am physically staring at my chat conversation that I've been using to craft my promotion case. I chose a custom GPT, a custom GPT specific for career coaching, because it's like, I also want to know like how to navigate this whole thing of my profession. And, I started with, hey, here's my situation. I'm going from this cohort to that cohort. What best sells my value story and highlights why I deserve to be my future cohort? And it gave me a whole list. And I was like, this is cool. Okay. I used none of that. It kind of just got me in the right frame of mind. It got me to understand what it would kick out, how I can leverage it.
Yeah.
And so then I asked the real question after that, which was, what are some storytelling techniques to identify the plot of my value story? Which I think it's at what you're getting at. What's been the main plot of my story? And how can I convey that to others? The people do it all the time.
Yeah.
I'm not a writer. I'm becoming one. And so I was like, okay, let's what are some ways people actually approach this that are effective that I might be able to replicate? So it gave me a list of them. There's 6 here, along with tips that come with crafting that value story. And so the one that resonated with me in this particular case was the problem, action, result method, where you state the problem, you state the action that you did, and then you state the result because of your action. And then because of some other advice that I've heard, I basically was like, okay, we'll work with that. Give me, I gave it some examples. Well, actually, I use that as a framework to then organize, like everyone knows what they did. That's their action. Everyone I've talked to, even some of my direct reports, like the first thing I ask when it comes to like what, how would you put together? What's your evidence? It's always things that you did. So that's your action. So I start with that. So I make a list of like problem, action, result. I fill in my action, and then I think about what was the problem that I was solving. If it's clear, I write that in. Then I ask, like, of these two things, give me the result or the impact statement given those two. And so when I don't have a clear, I was like, here's the thing I did. Give me a problem based off of my action, and give me an impact statement based off of that.
Yeah.
And then the final piece of this that I've been doing that has been very effective for me, just in learning, like, oh, that's an impact statement. It was okay, now give me a concise 2-sentence phrase starting with the impact first. So an impact first, 2-sentence phrase. And that's my impact statement. And so it gives me things that states a very clear and concise result of what I did. And then it presents the evidence as to how I did that, right?
Yeah.
And that's been the basis and then the latest sort of development, my journey here in crafting how to tell the plot of my value story. And I was like, okay, this might actually resonate with others. And I've seen that in the early reviews so far.
Yeah.
You know, there's still feedback. And I was like, man, no, that's like a perfect statement now. All right. I still have that reaction. But I have to tamper that down. I'm like, okay, like get rid of the ego. Yes, this is better. Accept that. Like that is progress. And there was like one statement. It was like, love this. And I was like, oh, good. There was one really good statement. And so I don't know, if you're anything like me, like I start nerding out on like the crafting of that piece because it's what I'm working on, right? I get kind of infatuated with whatever I'm doing, and the quality of that. So, but that's one way that I've used it effectively, right? And I just keep coming back and forth and back and forth. And if I don't like it, I ask it to regenerate and like do it this way or do it that way or
right.
And the last thing I wanted to share with you is to kind of wrap this whole thing up. So like I think those things are all valuable, and I think you could use them right now to start figuring out your narrative and the plot of your value story, and how that relates to leadership that you want to start presenting that to. The last thing I will share, and I've been sharing with anyone that would listen lately, is something I heard from a copywriter. It was on a podcast. I think it's the How I Write with someone that I can't remember, but the guest on the show was Harry Dry. Okay. He's from London. For really good copywriting, he has these 3 rules, these 3 questions that if you answer yes to all of these, then your copy is really good. It's going to be effective. All right. So then I've been using this as my impact check on my statements. Does it follow these 3 rules?
Yeah.
Most of the time it's like partially no. And so you're just like, oh, okay. So now I got the impact statement structure down. Now I understand that more. How do I now go to the next stage and like sell the crap out of that? So here are the 3 rules.
Yeah.
Can I visualize it? Can I falsify it? Can nobody else say this? It's a really great video, a really great interview, really great advice.
Yeah.
And I'm a visualizer. So I was like, oh, I understand number 1. Absolutely. I use this all day long. I create visual documentation of processes and connection of information that clarifies very complex ideas to people. That's one of my specialties. So like, oh, I get it. So if whatever you are saying is, it paints a very clear material picture in someone's mind, that's them able to visualize, and that's what they're going to recall, right? It's secondly, because I think we're getting close to time, but secondly, falsify it is, it's using things like a metric that I can clearly disprove or approve with some research, right? It's not just some general statement out there like,
I did a good job.
That's kind of our,
Okay.
Like, I am awesome.
Someone could say that you didn't do a good job. Like, there's the evidence.
And that is the process that is so grueling with, I think, any promotion cycle, anywhere you go. And I think companies like Dialexa do their best in clarifying the path upward and forward and using something as baseline as possible for everybody to contribute and to be measured against. Because that's the only way you can tackle performance that isn't going to be subjective. You try to make it as objective as possible, and it's just not going to be completely objective. But that falsifiable is where I think a lot of us trip up in knowing how to do that for ourselves. And so that's the evidence. Stake a claim, present very concrete evidence. He does this interesting thing where he writes a spectrum. On the top, it is, I think, abstract, and on the bottom, it's concrete. So sometimes you can put this through. Oh, actually, I think this is for the visualize it. Darn, but it's still a really good exercise. Where like you might have this idea, this word, like I don't know, the example that he uses is like woman. Maybe that's your audience or your demographic, and you go through and you think about the role, you think about like who your audience is. And all of what you get down to supermodel, right? Like that's sort of a way to be more concrete to that things that people can visualize. So sorry, I went back a little bit there, but I thought it was a really good exercise. Lastly, can nobody else say this? It's a statement that is unique to you that no one else can actually say. And I think a lot of times we talk about this in the feedback we get from when we present evidence without calling it this. But we always sort of describe it as it's your contributions. Yes, we're part of a team. Yes, we collaborate. But you should always be thinking about what is unique to you, and that is starting to identify your value to the company or to whoever it is that you're putting yourself in front of, to your clients or anyone that you're pitching to. And I think those 3 rules are also like the verge of my understanding of how to communicate more effectively, how to tell better stories, how to resonate with your audience better, and how to be more clear and concise for someone like myself that is so verbose and just wants to elaborate on everything and just but what a
we love the
meander, and we love it. That's why we're doing this podcast, because we like the meandering conversation. That's the fun part,
right?
But it doesn't always resonate with other people, and so it's like, okay, how can I start to apply? And I've started to apply these things even in my everyday speech. I'm thinking about them. So I will leave those with you and with our audience. Certainly, if anyone's listening to this, write us back. Tell us what you think of that. Tell us if you've used it, or if you think it's rubbish. How can we build on that? What else can we be doing? Because we're on this journey together.
That's right.
And I am not a professional copywriter. I am just learning the skills to make myself better and how I can apply them to my circumstances, which is what
your PowerPoint slides are just going to go up a notch. All right, let's do creating and consuming. Nice. What are you creating or consuming this week?
That's a really great question. What I just shared with you is one of the biggest things I consumed and am creating with.
Yeah, I think that's.
I'll let you go first on the create and consume. I'm curious what you've been
doing. Well, this past weekend, my girlfriend and I watched Mad Max Fury Road, which she had never seen, and then we followed it up by watching.
You watched them in that order?
We did. Yeah, we watched Fury Road first, and then we watched the prequel. And they were both good. And then there's a YouTube channel, Corridor, that does VFX and small indie type stuff, and they have a series called they do react videos, and they bring VFX people in to react to good and bad CGI, and they were doing a comparison between Fury Road and Furiosa.
Nice.
So we like watching that on Saturday mornings.
That's awesome.
We're like, well, if we're going to watch this episode, we have to watch the movies first. And, Fury Road is a really, like, it's an art house type movie, even though it's budget and everything like that. Like, you can tell that there was a vision and a craft and everything that went into it. And I think Furiosa is similar. It's interesting because I think Furiosa takes place, I don't know, like 20 years maybe or something before.
Yeah.
Fury Road.
Maybe not that long, but it might be.
Yeah. So it visually and aesthetically has a different style, and I don't think it had the same budget either. So there were just like practical limitations of why the movie might look a little bit different than one. But so apparently there's been some online conversations about how Furiosa isn't quite the same. It's not maybe as good, or the CGI isn't as good. I can explain that away for me because I'm just like, I don't know. It looks like how this world might look
before the other one
in the past, and and tying this back into narratives, the Mad Max series overall is really fascinating to me because George Miller, the creator and director, he wrote these stories as sort of like the legend of Mad Max, right? It's a mythology. It's the like the movie you're watching is somebody telling a story about the legend of this person. It's not necessarily supposed to be a definitive thing, right? Which is fascinating, because that's why you can say that there's some liberal continuity things between the different movies and stuff, because it's like, well, yeah, because these are not factual history. They're based on like these sort of, you know, hey, did you hear about the time that Mad Max fought in the Thunderdome? You know, like it's the same thing as like, hey, did you hear about the time that George Washington crossed the Delaware? Or
Johnny Appleseed, like,
yeah. You know, these are mythologies. These are the stories we tell ourselves. And I just find that really fascinating. And it's kind of funny that it dovetails with our discussion about narratives and everything, because there are different ways of telling this story, and myths and narratives are fun, and they evolve, they morph over time, and they may no longer be telling the factual history of something, but they are telling a story that is pertinent to the current audience.
Yeah, there are tones or topics that get addressed that have like someone sitting in the audience today will think of the world that they're in when they consume that art. Which is kind of interesting. I ended up I love those movies. My wife hates them. Like, she just like, oh, this is why are you watching that? Like, it's fascinating. Like, isn't that cool? Like, isn't that art awesome? She's like, ugh, no.
It's silly. It's fun.
But I also ended up watching Furiosa recently, because my son, who was barely a year old at the time, ended up buying it on our TV. So I was like, guess I'm watching this now. I loved it.
Yep.
I was already going to watch it, but he made me watch it sooner because he bought it. You rented it for me. But I enjoyed it. I kind of liked the things they chose to tie in. And again, the mythology of like Furiosa's arm, right? It was a big, let's say, prop in Furiosa of her motivation and drive to get back home, of how she was going to do it, the memory of it. And then all of a sudden she makes a choice valuing life in the moment that sacrificed herself, knowing full well this means she may never go home, accepting a different future. To your point, callback, this also reminds me of our conversation and how you have to start, you have to stop doing some things and focus on the core things of what you are strongest in, what you might find most satisfaction in. And in doing that, niching down your skill set, you start to clarify the value you can contribute to and continue on your journey to the next peak of your career. And you can identify that more clearly. I think that's the big takeaway there. And sometimes it hurts.
I just thought that was you're right. That was a very like interesting and key thing. Like, they could have just made it like, oh yeah, she loses her arm at some point. But the fact that they made her losing her arm a like powerful narrative driver, or a huge like part of her hero's journey is, I just think that's really cool. One of my favorite TV shows, How I Met Your Mother. People can hate it or love it. I don't care.
My wife liked it. I never got into it.
But one of the things they would do is, because it's such a like flash forward, flashback type show, they would write themselves. The writer said that they would write themselves into a corner sometimes, where they just create like a one-off, like random thing, and then like later on they would be like, okay, we know we're going to have to address this thing that we wrote way back then, how does it apply, and how do we apply it in a way that works with the characters, matches their story, progresses the story, adds an additional layer to it. And I think it feels like the same thing. You can imagine that George Miller didn't set out when he made Fury Road to say like, okay, she only has one arm, and the reason why, and that's very important to her character, is because like he probably didn't do
like,
that.
This would be interesting. Make it more challenging.
It would be interesting for her, like, just why does everyone have all of their limbs in this post-apocalypse?
Yeah.
So how would they? Of course, people have probably lost a limb. Let's give her one arm and
whatever consideration.
An interesting character. And then later on, they're able to say like, okay, now how she only got one arm has a narrative driver to it because of her character. Like, I just think that movie writers don't get enough credit, I think, for a lot of things. I think a lot of their great ideas probably get overridden by the studios too.
Yeah,
but that's
that, and also
whole separate podcast.
Dismissed by action movie by people who might actually really value if they go a layer, just a layer or two deeper beyond the blow them up, shoot them up events that occur when it's present. Sometimes not present.
When it's present.
That makes me think, though, another callback, because you triggered something there for me, and it was when you do your initial work, you're working to, as a young adult or a teenager, you do a series of retail jobs, let's say, which is my example, and then you get the opportunity to go to college, and then you specialize in something, you start having you have a professional career, we call it. I always sort of I was like, okay, that old part of me was done with. The new part of me is now what I'm measured against. How long have I been a professional? Yeah. Which is true. But whenever I went through like my pivot journey, I was in this whole deconstruction of value. I was like, you know what? I'm really good with people. Do you know why I'm really good with people? I started in merchandising at Six Flags. Yeah. And ever since then, I've been growing this customer service skill that nobody wants to recognize.
Yeah.
But as a product owner, product manager now, that's what I do all day. And that's a valuable skill if you're able to craft it in a way that makes sense. So now all of a sudden the 10 years of retail work or whatever it has been something around there was like, I'm throwing that in. Absolutely. I think that's valuable to somebody. And if it's not valuable to you, I don't want to work for you, because like, that's where I'm going.
Yeah.
See the totality of me, at least where it matters. So yeah. Interesting memory.
Cool. It's awesome.
Oh, cool, man.
Look at it come full circle.
Well, Tom, this has been great, my friend.
As always, John.
What did you take away from this sit down together? What are some core things you?
Yeah, I think we set out to kind of talk about like narratives and careers and stuff like that, and we not only accomplished that, but I think it was great. I really like your specific application of your promotion case, and understanding how powerful narratives are with something as tangible as making a change, right? That's what has been the most interesting part of today's conversation. Is change is inevitable, and narratives help us deal with or approach that change. So if we want to be good at change, we've got to be good at narratives. We've got to be good at telling the stories of that change.
Well said. Love that. Cut. That's great. That's perfect. Well, Tom, I enjoyed it. Awesome, friend. See you, Tom.
Easy, John. Take it easy, everybody else. Talk to you later.
Bye. Thank you for listening to My Next Big Move. I'm Jonathan Nessery with Tom Morrison. We'll see you next time.